Hey, hi everyone.
Hey, Ananth, good to see you.
Hello.
Hey.
Awesome. Super excited because I feel like I was just telling Gorkem and Nick that I feel like I am, with the celebrities of the month at this point. So super excited, and maybe we can actually just get started. Firstly, thank you everybody for joining us. We're gonna keep this great data debate that's been on for the last month pretty real today, and we'd love to have a lot of participation. We'll open up to questions. We'll do a ton of polls to actually see how everyone's feeling about a ton of the debates that we're having. So to kick us off, exactly a month ago, turns out on February 5th, Gorkem, who joined us today, co-founder of Features and Labels, wrote this blog on the unbundling of Airflow. And then from there, remarkably quickly, Nick, the founder of Elemental, and Daxter is here with us, who wrote a blog on the rebundling of the data platform in the next 24 hours. And I think it kicked off, I think in at least what I've seen in the last 6 months, probably the most heated debate in the data space. Ananth, who writes a popular newsletter that almost all of us subscribe to, Data Engineering Weekly, recently shared his take, questioning bundling versus unbundling, the purpose of an orchestration engine, and all of that. And so I am super excited for this conversation to have the three most influential voices of this debate together with us. I believe for the first time ever in one Zoom room, together in this great data debate. Before we start, here's how we wanted to start today. And I want to force all of you to actually pick a side. And there are only two sides to the debate. And we're going to open this up to the audience as well. It's either a fully bundled data stack or a unbundled data stack. Only two options. And so I'm going to start with forcing you all to pick a side and why you pick the option that you pick. Go first.
Is this for the panel? There's a poll. I got a poll. Is this for the panelists or is this for the audience?
The audience is doing a poll as we speak, but I'd love quick takes from the three of you on which side you'd pick. Fully bundled or unbundled?
Okay, so I have to, I guess, take the unbundling side here, even though I think that's a bit of an extreme and it's not necessarily what I think should happen, but I can be the devil's advocate and make the case for unbundling.
Okay, so Gorkem on unbundling.
Yeah.
Nick?
I'm in a similar position where I have to be the bundled data stack person, since literally the title of the article was Rebundling the Data Platform. However, I appreciate that you marketed this as debate. I actually think that Gorkem and I saw a same underlying reality, and just our framework for approaching it was slightly different. We both agree that the data stack needs to be cohered in some way, shape, or form. Gorkem was describing the state of the world as he sees it, and I was describing one sort of solution to that world. So I actually don't view this as unbundled versus bundled. Everyone agrees there needs to be a cohering force in the data platform stack.
Yeah.
It's just a question of how you frame up the problem and then what the solution is. So if I were in the audience, I don't know if I would vote for the bundled data stack because that has a bunch of implications and definitions, but I will take the side and I will define what bundled means in my framework.
Awesome. Okay, so we have one unbundled and one bundled. Ananth?
Yeah, I think both have been taken. So I'll try to get a middle ground of it. I think so the way I'm looking at from an architectural function perspective, right? What it means to build a data stack at an industrial scale. That is what they need. Every company is struggling. And the pattern that I noticed, as the company is growing fast, and the complexity of the data increases, and then they're not able to do or leverage what the real potential of it. I work for Zendesk, and the reality is the same. We have this large potential data, but we are not able to realize that, partly because the complexity of the data increases. And so where do you bundle? Where do you unbundle? It's really an architectural function of it. So I'm kind of taking the middle ground, and I can come back why I see in a middle ground get out of it.
Sure, awesome. And actually with that, let's actually end the poll and see what the audience had to say on this one. So we have 67% unbundled data stack and 33% bundled data stack. I actually want to force everyone to like pick a side, and in the end, we'll actually do this again with a third option, which is somewhere in the middle, and see what everyone thinks. But in some ways, like I think that's as we think about this debate and all the sides of this debate, I think the answer, it seems like the most of this is it depends, right? And there's, we're probably going to end somewhere in the middle of the bundled versus unbundled debate. But before we actually go to talk about the ideal state, I actually want to spend some time talking about how we got here in the first place, because I think that history of the data stack is really important to sort of actually frame what the future of the data stack is going to look like, right? Something I joke about often is, how terrible it would be to be a buyer in the data space right now. Like, I feel terrible for anyone who would have to evaluate products in the data space right now. So many categories of tooling, so many types of products, and so many sort of murky overlaps in some ways, right? And Nick, I think in your blog, you had mentioned, I don't think anyone believes that this is the ideal end state. Would love to get your thoughts on what got us here in the first place, right? Like if you think about it, a couple of decades ago, we had products in the stack that were broadly bundled, right? Like we had companies like RG Metrics and Domo that were building out that bundled data stack to a certain extent. And then that changed. And so would love to get some thoughts around what drove us to this point from a historical context, and that can frame us into going forward into the ideal state.
I can go. I can do my take.
Yeah, Nick, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like how we got here, and I'll talk about, the modern data stack is critical because it's kind of like the terminology that we've all happened to cohere around. And you're describing how we've moved to like these like strictly vertically integrated solutions that were built by vendors, and then sort of like the world's way different now. So what happened? Typically when this happens, when there's some sort of snap like this and the entire world either falls apart or it decoheres, or there's a Cambrian explosion, there's some underlying constraints that have been lifted. So what happened here? Like the preeminence of the cloud, right? And effectively what I view this is rebuilding all of those capabilities in those vertically integrated stacks, but incrementally by many vendors with different underlying constraints. So what's going on here? The world has gotten way more complicated. So way more heterogeneous data sources, SaaS tools, also the demands from the consumer side, meaning people expect more out of data systems, ML, all these things contribute. So a dramatic explosion of complexity in terms of requirements complexity. And then underlying architectures have changed as well. Most importantly, the public cloud architectures. Those two constraints, increased complexity and demands. Also just the underlying cloud architectures, meaning that we need to infinitely scale compute, and also people adopt data technologies from inception all the way to IPO. And essentially none of those vertically integrated solutions held up under those two different assumptions in the world. And we have been rebuilding the data stack from the ground up under those new constraints. And that's why we're at the modern data stack today, which to me involves, there's a ton of different definitions of the modern data stack, right? But to me, it's a mindset. And it's, you're building for the cloud, you're using SaaS services a lot, and managed services. And then you're also, in order to handle this complexity, embracing software engineering principles to manage that complexity as you go up. And if you kind of like mash up those three properties, you have the modern data stack.
What do you think, Ananth?
Yeah.
For Gorkem, go.
Yeah. So I think Nick is spot on. And once that paradigm shift happened, the dev tooling to support that paradigm shift wasn't there. All we had, for better or worse, was these flexible workflow orchestration tools, and people were kind of left alone to deal with this new reality. So what happened is they in some words abused these workflow orchestration tools. In my example, it's the Airflow case that's being abused, and because it's Python based, it's super flexible. You can do whatever you want with it. So people went ahead and built like end-to-end pipelines with it. So they built their EL, extract and load workload scripts with it. They built like DBT-like frameworks inside to do SQL transformations. And they did like data science, BI, everything end-to-end with Airflow. I don't blame them, because usually once there is a way to do things inside a company, that's usually the fastest way to do it. And people usually want to get things done. So more complexity get added to Airflow, which wasn't really a tool to solve all of this, but it was there available and it was easy. So that's how I talk about like unbundling. People realize, okay, now we can better address these parts of tasks that are being done in this big Airflow DAG. And DBT is the best example. They decided, okay, the SQL transformations, let's abstract out this workflow and build a better tool. Like Airbyte Fivetran, they realized, okay, this custom scripts are being written all over again in every single company. All right, let's build a service that does that for everyone. And downstream of it, data science and BI, they have their own tools. Like, unfortunately, yes, no one wants to use all these tools at the same time, but I understand why. I think we are in this unique point in time where no single tool can do all of this, and people are better off using multiple tools because it gets them like much faster and quicker to kickstart the data team. And I would say that is like the best case for why people are using this many tools. But I think this is a very unique time in our little history, because it wasn't like this before, and it's probably not going to stay like this.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I want to also make clear when we're talking about this, that the heterogeneity, all these different tools that have cropped up, that's great. It's awesome. Like, the world is way better than it was 10 years ago.
Right.
But the outgrowth of that is chaos and this feeling of everything being out of control. And what you were describing, which was that like being a vendor, choosing between vendors and making sense of the world is like impossible. So this heterogeneity is great. Like, the amount of innovation is awesome. It's just now we need to make sense of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think very few people actually remember what it was like even 5 years ago. Like, I remember we were a data team ourselves. Like, that's how we started in our genesis. And I think we were one of the first very early adopters of Airflow back then. And I think we built like almost like an internal tool for everything that has like you can actually get started in like 30 minutes now, right? And so I think that like we've made a ton of progress as a data stack, and I think a part of that is because of the unbundling, which has allowed for like innovation in every aspect of the tooling stack.
Yeah, I think my take on a lot similar to what Nick and was kind of mentioning it out. I think look back like 2014, what has really happened, right? Like, the talk of the data is about how do we produce the value? Like, recommendation engine is the single most, example that everyone wanted to implement a recommendation engine. The use case is much low, but the urge from the business and the technology community is about how do we produce the value quickly and show the business value to prove that data is significant enough to bring more investment to the system. And that is a whole, I think that theme is kind of still echoing if you see most of the modern data ecosystem. And that is a fundamental question that I kind of asked back, what it means to have an orchestration engine is here, right? We still focusing out, like we're focusing modern data technologies, like kind of focusing on producing data assets, and none of them really talking about managing the data assets, right? So we are trying to build those vertical systems popping up here and there, and then like, oh, DBT, you can build this model quickly, you can deliver it. Some executive asking you an ad hoc question, you can answer it. But what happened after that? What it means to maintain that system? Operability. I mean, the modern data stack, so the result of we spend too much time on proving the value of data to produce more and more applications. And we never took a step back and say like, what it mean to operating this? So the whole MLOps is essentially as a revert back and say like, oh, okay, operating the system. And even if you see the current state, it's easier to train the model, but it's hard operating the system here. So I think that is, I mean, that is the take I have, like why we end up in this very diverse set of data tools, essentially.
Yeah, no, that, and I think the core element, I think, and many of you have like echoed, right? And we think about this a lot, which is that the unique thing about data is diversity. Like fundamental to data is the fact that, like, to make a data project successful, you need multiple kinds of personas in the room in the first place, right? Like you need the business context, you need the data context, you need engineering, you need analytics, you need scientists. And I think that creates that fundamental diversity, which is unlike most other teams that exist out there in the ecosystem, right? And so that diversity is going to be there. I think that diversity has had its positives, but today, like as many of us talked about, has led to that chaos, right? The challenge is not the diversity, the challenge is the chaos, which is a result of the diversity in some ways. And so I think from there, that's a great segue, right, into talking about the ideal end state. And I think with that, I think many of us can only make predictions on what the ideal, or hopes and dreams for what the ideal end state would look like, but would love to actually get some key, like top 2 or 3 key ideas that you're betting on. And would also specifically, I know as we've talked about this bundling and unbundling debate, there's also been a lot of misconceptions around the ideas that, especially Gorkem, Nick, that you've talked about. And so would love to cover, like, what are the top 2 or 3 ideas you're betting on? And what are the misconceptions in how people are comprehending those ideas that we should talk about today?
So I think about it there's kind of like a decision tree when you're talking about how to cohere these systems. I think the top one is vertical versus horizontal integration. So in one branch, you have vertical integration, where you have the Databricks stack, and they have solutions for all of these layers, and the Snowflake stack, and the Google stack, and generally with the base foundation being what we like to think of as the data plane, meaning the data warehouse, and you vertically integrate everything, right? You can clearly see this, like Snowflake is aggressively moving in this direction, in my view. Like with Snowpark, they're trying to make it so you can execute arbitrary Python, not just SQL, on top of their data plane. To me, that's clear. They just like want to get as much in their stack as possible. No matter what, I don't want that world. I think that's a bad world. Well, bad's too strong, but so there will be people who want to use vertically integrated shop. I don't think it's good for the ecosystem. Then there's the horizontal layer. So the only other way you can cohere the system is by picking a horizontal layer and kind of having that be a choke point, so to speak, where you can plug in different tools, different data planes, say, different data warehouses, and then you can also plug in higher level tools on top of that. So what are the different horizontal integration points, right? Some people, and typically it's the vendors which say this, right? It's like the data catalog is definitely going to be this cohering layer that makes everything work. No. It's going to be the metrics layer. It's going to be the workflow manager. And this is what we were talking about in the rebundling article. Our belief is that the kind of this cohering layer, this horizontal layer, is going to be a new type of control plane that combines both the orchestration engine, but also asset awareness. So that you have this sort of like very base layer of observability lineage, and then also observability, did I already say that? And some level of operational cataloging as well, where you can view your entire data platform in one unified fabric of assets. And then you have different computational engines and storage engines under that, and then different higher level software tools on top of that. And so, so to summarize, right, we believe at Elemental and Dagster there's going to be a horizontal layer that is a cohering centralized force, and that the natural place to do it is sort of to have a unified control plane with orchestration at its core, but that's asset aware.
Yeah, so in my article, I also alluded to the solution, what we think, but we didn't get a chance to actually write about it. And I think what Nick says makes a total sense. Like, and DBT as a tool knows this, and they try to stay warehouse agnostic, cloud agnostic, whatever you call it. So I think they are also understanding that they have to be the horizontal layer that stays on top of all these different platforms. Doesn't matter, it's Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery, Google. So I think dbt is very well positioned also to help with this rebundling, or at least their position is stronger if they stay as this horizontal layer that Nick talks about. And one additional thing I'm going to add to this, I think, yes, we always talk about vendors, but I think the healthiest way some of the rebundling to happen is with more software libraries. Like in software engineering, everyone, like Nick knows this the best. I think he was building Facebook infrastructure in the GraphQL front-end world. There's like so many packages, so many libraries for every little thing, which we don't have that in the data world yet. dbt started with that. It's in the name. It stands for data build tool, and there are like lots of transformation libraries out there that would like create models for you, dbt models for you. But I think what we are missing is more logical, more higher level dbt packages that maybe like do the work for these vendors. So metrics, they started with it. Basically, dbt metrics package is a dbt package. It's nothing more than that. I would expect something similar for feature stores, for machine learning, experimentation maybe could be, and also like ML monitoring, data quality. These things can also be handled by very, very good software packages, which for some reason, I'm interested to see what others think. It's not mature enough in the data world because maybe we are missing a good package manager, a good build tool. I think dbt is executing towards this future, but we are not there yet.
Right. I think my view most close to what Nick is kind of mentioning about, like horizontal layer, is what I'm betting on. And I can tell you what is a complexity I ran through for last 6-7 years about like misusing Airflow or any other aspect of it. Is that I think that's what I mentioned in the second article. If you are creating a metric or if you are creating a data or table, and we assume that that is static, and that is once you create a metric, that's the metric going to remain the same. In reality, that is not the case. Metric has its own life cycle, table has its own life cycle, and the data is inherently social in nature. And one other aspect we need to be very, one other factor to note is that analytical workload in the whole data ecosystem is part of it. There are many other systems that use data that is not really part of this analytical ecosystem also, when you're talking about dbt, we assume that it'll be in a perfect model. That is not the case in the reality, right? So every asset has its own life cycle, metric has its own life cycle. Having those disparate systems like, okay, data lineage, you have to go to one system, and data discovery system, you have to go to one system. And what happened is that none of them are fully context aware of end-to-end asset. If you have a data lineage system or a data discovery system which has assumed that we have end-to-end context, and it's because of the vendor lock that will not share across the orchestration engine, and somebody has to maintain the life cycle. What will happen if I wanted to do a metrics V1 to metrics V2? What will happen? I wanted to delete only a particular column of a PI information for that. And I wanted to figure it out who are the upstream is actually using that or downstream is actually using that. And in reality right now, we are writing our own orchestration engine in many cases to, we fetch those lineage and do some data operations here. And there is too much focus on, the way I see that analytics and data science is the last mile value creation work, but there are more number of there is no more in the background. If you take a small analogy, like, if you wanted to have this, the analogy that I took in the last article about the cotton mill, like, how do we build this cotton mill of an industrial scale? The modern system is kind of too much focused on building, like, how do we create this beautiful shirt, like many designs of shirt, how do we kind of create this market? But we don't have this end-to-end supply chain lineages working, in the sense like we have this broken cotton mill problem, but we are focusing on the abstraction outside of it. So that's what my article was kind of mentioning about. we're trying to build an abstraction where we have not yet solved the context-aware orchestration engine to manage this life cycle of it. And my opinion, Airflow was supposed to do that. Airflow does support a backfill feature for a exact reason, because Airflow system itself assumed that we will be doing backfill. And that is one of the reasons why Airflow is very, very popular. Oh, there is someone actually implemented a concept of backfill, and you can do Airflow backfill and do that. In reality, that is not a scalable solution. There's another thing how Airflow implemented. But that is a life cycle, right? We don't have any context-rich platform right now to handle the end-to-end life cycle of a metrics. How do we create it? How do we deprecate it? What it means to the downstream, what it means to the upstream. And I would bet on the horizontal layer first, and then maybe some apps on top of it more. So that would be more my view on this take.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I think, as Nick said, I think, and I think there's some data leaders in the room who also echo this, right? Which is that the fully bundled data platform has challenges, and that challenges, it will limit innovation. That was exactly where we were 10 or 15 years ago. And in some ways, this unbundling life or world that we're living in today has actually helped us. I think personally, I've seen more innovation in the last 3 years than maybe in the last couple of decades, right? In some ways, as you think about the data stack. The other element, which is interesting, is this concept of the control plane, right? And in some ways, it's actually beautiful that we're talking about this today. Like, because 4 years ago, in some ways, I think the data stack was still getting created. And we were solving much more fundamental problems in the data stack. So the fact that we're talking about the control plane in some ways itself is progress. It means that we've actually moved to the next order of problems that we have to sort of solve as an ecosystem. And I think the layer is, we don't really know what the control plane is going to look like, right? I think it's still getting formed, but it's likely that there is going to be a control plane, and we need a control plane to enable this sort of broad unbundled data stack to work well together and reduce that chaos. Yeah, go on.
I think we wanted to make one quick point about, like, we assume that the world of informatica is bad, right? I mean, I think that assumption is, I'm really want to kind of a little bit challenge on that, because if you think informatica at the time, it's trying to solve the problem of where data is only for a reporting use case, but the fundamental concept of remain the same. And even for the Kimball methodologies, like how we kind of doing the dimensional modeling and other stuff, is still valid in most of the cases. And all those metrics layer that we're talking about is, I see more resemblance with SAP objects, right? Business objects, exactly the same concept of defining your dimensions and metrics and talking about it. I think there is a lot of things we could learn from the past, and we all try to, conquer SQL for 10 years and we failed, and we say that, okay, this is a way to go that. And I feel like as a modern data stack, we should really go and study the best things of informatica as a business object and see, like, how does that work in an enterprise scale and what we can learn out of it and to implement, take it the best out of it. Things like that.
That's an amazing point. Nick, Gorkem, do you have any thoughts to share on that?
I guess one thing that's happening, at least, is even the metrics layers that are being built right now. I haven't really seen how exactly DBT did it. I don't think they released it fully. I think it's in a private beta. But I looked at the code, and I think from their presentations, at least the metrics layer that is being built today, or metrics layers that are being built today, is more open. Like before, if you had metrics in LookML or in one of these tools, you had to be a LookML user to actually go do other things with this metric. Same with other tools. But I think what they are trying to do is very interesting, where they want other tools to consume these metrics. And I think that opens way more doors and creativity for other developers to go now and build on top of it. I think that's pretty amazing.
I mean, in terms of the point of looking at history, I think it's really important. And I think you can see this in the way that the Hadoop ecosystem was conquered by the cloud data warehouses where, there was all this work to scale out compute using not SQL. And then folks at Snowflake, BigQuery, et cetera, were like, actually, there's an ideal language, or at least agreed upon standard for analytical workloads. It's SQL. Let's just use SQL. And then they were able to scale that out. And what's interesting is that, we in this universe get so wrapped up in kind of the next thing that I don't think people really realize it. Not that many people adopted Hadoop, and they just went straight from Vertica and Teradata all the way to the cloud data warehouse, which just like didn't involve like a huge mental model shift, to just make it so that you could like scale things infinitely for free and like have on-demand pricing and all that stuff. So, I think there's a lot to learn in that way, which is like generally those vertically integrated vendors, they weren't dumb. They were building their technology under different constraints. And, we could probably save ourselves a lot of work on a purely practical level just by going back and examining those more legacy tools, and realize that like not everyone is like adopting every single new incremental tool along the way. They're still stuck in the 10-year ago world.
I think that's an interesting one in terms of like, especially in our case, because we do, I guess we compete with Informatica at some level, right? And so I actually do agree with Ananth on that, right? Like, I think there's actually like, if you think about everything that, like, there's a lot that was built. Now we can question, was it like, it still takes like years to implement, and you can question, is it user friendly? And you can question like, do they talk like this data quality talk well to like discovery layers? Like, you can talk through all of those, and then you can, I think there's like enough around that. But I think there's, there were I think I'd spoken to a VP at Morgan the other day, and she was like, 20 years ago, like, these are not new problems, right? Like, she was like, 20 years ago, I started my career, and we were talking about the same problems. Like, we talked about the same problems in the first week of my job. And then like last week I went into a room and we were talking about the same problems. But to me personally, what's powerful, like, I feel like we're probably, with what's happened with the modern data stack at these at a fundamental level, today I think we're closer to solving those problems finally than we probably were, I think, at least a decade ago. So with that, and I know we touched on this a little bit with Gorkem, some of what you were saying. We think a lot about this concept of DNA, right? Which is, are there some aspects of the stack? I think we all agree that, broadly there's going to be some amount of unbundling that should stay in the stack and is good for innovation. And are there parts of the stack that naturally lend themselves to being bundled with other parts of the stack? And so I want to do this actually as something that's a little bit more fun, and actually open up with some polls or panel polls with the audience as well, and ask some questions around some parts of the stack. I know we've all mentioned the metrics layer in the last
Okay.
So I'll start with the metrics layer. Metrics layer, bundled or unbundled? Like, do you think that there's that eventually we will end up with metrics layer bundled with data transformation on one hand, like dbt or BI,
I think,
or standalone?
This is all, but I don't want to ruin the poll.
I'd love,
so is the question for me or for the audience? Sorry.
We'll do both together. Like the audience will do the poll, and then we'll share our thoughts parallelly. So Gorkem, do you want to go?
I think metrics layer is one of those things that are being bundled, and we are seeing that happening with dbt. Some of the metrics layer vendors even like started pivoting, because I think dbt is very well located to solve this problem, and they're, I think, solving it in an elegant way. So I'm gonna say bundled for the metrics layer.
Yeah, I think I would vote for bundle, partly because like metrics as a layer standalone, like, I mean, I'm going back to the same life cycle, right? If you don't bundle it, somebody will build an orchestration engine to manage the life cycle. So somebody has to build it, and that's the reality of operating the system. So if either dbt or Daxter or even some lineage tool provide that, because if you look back, the data lineage or data discovery system end up with a connected graph, and adding a new task is like just adding another another layer on top, another edge on that. So, I mean, whoever does that, as long as they have the ability to manage the life cycle, I'm totally fine with that.
I'm honestly not sure. is my honest answer. So I guess I will take the coward's way out and not vote. But yeah, I'm very interested to see how this space evolves. I also think honestly, I understand intuitively what a metrics layer is, but I don't have as much visibility into how it's actually used in practice a lot. Because I think it's very new to the outside world. But at places like Airbnb, it's like a very they have a system called Minerva, which is effectively this. And I don't have a deep understanding of how that, the details are everything in this thing.
Awesome. We'll actually see what the audience has to say. And it turns out the audience is broadly divided, with 57% saying metrics layer bundled, but 43% actually saying standalone, which is interesting. So we'll revisit this in 3 years and see where we ended. Okay, next question. I'm curious about actually thoughts around reverse ETL and data ingestion. Mainly because if you think about it from a DNA perspective, it seems like it's actually this similar capabilities as you think about what it takes to build those, ingestion and reverse ETL. We've recently started seeing some players in ingestion launch reverse ETL capabilities. What are your thoughts?
So this is one that
some of the panelists go first. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think superficially they seem like there's tons of sharing between the two of them, but I think it's mostly about domain knowledge of how the schemas in the various source and target applications work. Like the organization has deep knowledge of, for example, like Salesforce probably is the most important integration in the reverse ETL and data ingestion ecosystem. However, as technical artifacts, I actually think they're quite separate as they're currently constituted. You can imagine like different layers of tools that kind of combine them in interesting ways. Like if you kind of enabled, like, for example, a unified, almost like CRUD interface over the data that's stored in the data warehouse, where like you could write an app on top of Salesforce that like mutates into the data warehouse and then kind of manages all the syncs there, then it makes sense to bundle them. But I actually think in the way the two categories are constituted, I believe they'll remain unbundled for a long period of time.
Yeah, I guess the same thing, because the reverse ETL is all about domain knowledge, and these vertical systems are well equipped to provide more and more insight. Actually, the workflow going to happen there. So the reverse ETLs will be focusing more on how do we join diverse data sets and then produce the coherent object model, which companies like Zendesk or Salesforce kind of exposing, so that you can enrich the workflow for the various business functionality. Versus ETL is kind of focusing on, okay, this is an object model already we exposed by external vendors, and I wanted to bring in and then do some data transformation. I believe ETL tool mostly people are using to sync these two models into the system. So I can see the both going to remain this unbundled sometime.
Yeah, so I think people are going to attempt to bundle it. There's so much money. We see money that went into this that people are going to run out of connectors to build, and eventually
that is definitely true.
Companies are going to jump over to the other side and going to try to do it. Will they be successful? I'm not so sure, but there's definitely going to be attempts and claims that they are bundling it.
I think one vendor can sell both the product, but I think they will sell it as a separate product. I think in that way, it will be still unbundled, in my opinion.
Got it. Okay. Well, turns out our audience seems to think similarly, that it will be unbundled and exist as a standalone versus bundled together. Third one, this one I'm interested, data quality, bundled or unbundled. And by this, I mean more like quality testing. Is there, like, do we see that being bundled into other layers, or do they stay standalone?
So wait, are we not supposed to pollute the poll, or do we have to the audience, or should we just start talking?
I just start talking.
Well, this is an interesting one that we think about a lot, because Dagster is this data orchestration platform that's asset aware. So I would call us that we're data quality cognizant or curious, but we don't have a full end-to-end data quality solution. So, so I think that we will be aware of data quality insofar that we have our built-in asset catalog, which all it is like basically a key that represents an asset and then a stream of events, a mutable log of events that records whatever happened to that asset over time. And one of those event types is a expectation or a data quality check. And so, for example, we imagine coexisting with something like Gray Expectations, like forever, because they have very strong opinions about how their assertions should be structured. They build their tooling based on that highly opinionated assertion language. We have no interest in building like a super high level assertion language like this, but we want to be able to have something like Gray Expectations pump their data quality metadata exhaust into a centralized system, and then be able to have a single kind of operational asset catalog that can link back out to those tools. So we kind of view our control plane as a central hub and spoke model where different tools can jam in different bits of metadata exhaust into our operational asset catalog, and be aware of the concept of data quality. But there will still be tools like Gray Expectations Monte Carlo that have super strong opinions about the way data quality is structured, as well as like workflows around them, alerting and all sorts of, and manual curation and all sorts of features. So we imagine being kind of aware of what's going on there.
Yeah, I think this is a great example to one of the other points I made earlier about libraries and data libraries. I would like this problem to solve as a data library, and Great Expectations already has someone I think built a DBT package for it. But there are other data quality DBT packages out there, and it doesn't have to be only SQL. It can be implemented in other languages. But what's interesting, I think this happened with AI, where like the vendors are now just a front end, just the workflow handling of the information, just showing the information, but not doing any calculation. Something similar might happen with data quality, where these data quality companies can turn into a front end for displaying the open source package that is the standard for data quality. And that may be the future we see with data quality vendors. The heavy lifting is done by a software library on that is this, but the vendor is just building the UI to create alerts and things like that, visualize.
Yeah, I think a very big plus one on that. I think the way I see that data quality, data testing is a library, not a standalone system, because I mean, you detect that issue. Now what? Somebody has to mitigate the issue, and data pipeline can fail. Like, often the nature of the data pipeline is that you see a problem. It's not really a problem. It's like a symptom. Your problem will be like, 4-step, 5-step upstream somewhere. You see some duplicate row that you have failed to check it out, and maybe 3-4 downstream pipeline may not even look at that look at the row, but some other system might look at it. Right? So it failed. The root cause of the thing will be very, very hard to detect. So you need some kind of a workflow engine or some kind of a UI to navigate and understand, and who will have it, right? I think even though Nick kind of denying that this is not happening, but the market dynamics and the growth market is here, it's inevitable. Whoever control the workflow have the larger market share. So I wouldn't be surprised this getting bundled very quickly. I think this is the one area that I see the systems, data quality and orchestration will get bundled much sooner than and later, my opinion.
Okay, and seems like this is actually the first one where it seems like the audience seems to agree with you, Ananth, that data quality is likely to be bundled. So we're at 53%, 47%. So let's see where that goes. Final question, which is observability. And I want to call out observability slightly differently than quality. How do we feel about observability and bundled or unbundled?
I'll let someone else go first this time.
Yeah, honestly, this is a hard one for me. I think this is more useful in bigger data organizations where this actually becomes a problem. And maybe like this is a tool that gets added, maybe not immediately, but later in the life of a data team. I'm not so sure because it's such a big topic, like it can mean a lot of things. So I'm not sure how to exactly answer it. But Prakalpa, I'm sure you have ideas on this. So maybe let's hear you on this.
The audience is asking good questions. One, observability is too broad a term, which I agree with. And two, Ravi said, what is data observability? Which was a question that I was going to pose to the panel. Because like, if we don't know what something is, how can we discuss it?
Yeah. Some audience questions. Maybe I'll talk about like the way I see the difference in some ways, because I think there's like some overlaps today in the market because of where we are. But in my head, for example, the way I think about it, I actually think quality and observability are two slightly different things, right? Quality is closer to your data stack. Like the real problem there is how do you run a test at like 100 million rows? Doing everything for like 1 million rows is like easy. Doing anything for like at the scale of like 100 million rows is hard. Like that's a data stack problem. Like the DNA of the company there is slightly different. Versus observability is about saying, hey, it's a diversity problem. You're looking across the stack, across a bunch of different tools. That's where things like lineage, that's where things like upstream, downstream, you're observing the stack and saying, hey, something broke downstream or something is likely to have broken upstream, recheck your dashboard, right? Elements like that. And so I think of observability as a control plane, diversity metadata problem versus quality as closer to the data stack in some ways from a DNA perspective. And I love thoughts from the panel as well, given these are like, these are evolving topics.
I mean, I like similar to what David kind of just posted, right? I see observability as an independent continuous audit system. But the question that I have, but I don't have an answer, is that what is the business value proposition of having this continuous audit system, right? Like you are running those data pipeline continuously, maybe hourly batch line or anything. And by the time you're running this audit pipeline and detecting something wrong, there is a fine balance between speed and correctness in the system, right? So you cannot compromise speed versus correctness. And by the time you detect how late is too late, because if you are doing a continuous model deployment, your model is already there, and then correcting the system, again, the complicated nature of the data pipeline is really, really difficult in this case. I think what I would see that it's still running as an independent audit system, but the root cause analysis, how quickly it can figure it out, it still requires a full lineage and the context. Without that, I don't think the audit system can work because it has to understand the lineage to know how the data transformation happened over the period of a time. And now who will hold that lineage? And I'm going back to the market dynamics. I believe whoever having this lineage will either bundle together or develop their own system over the period of a time.
Yeah, no,
just to preserve the business value proposition for that.
I know, DJ, I know you asked a question. I agree with some of your thoughts on chat as well, but I think the way I think about this is that observability is like a use case for metadata. Like we spend a lot of time thinking about the metadata plane in some ways. And like, if you think about the metadata plane is all your context and all your relationships in some way in that metadata plane, right? And if you have that, so today observability companies are doing both quality and observability, like they're hitting both because that was a gap in the market. You can't do observability without quality and you can't do quality without, like you need both. But as the quality ecosystem matures in some ways, I think that's a problem that will get closer to the data stack. And then in an ideal case, your metadata plane, like all of these are use cases of metadata, right? Like discovery is a use case for metadata, observability is a use case for metadata. Ideally, I mean, we've just scratched the surface of what that should mean. Like in an ideal case, the way if you think about it, you should be able to say 90% of my users logged into my BI tool at 5 p.m. on a Friday. That's usage metadata. You should be able to like auto scale up and down compute. You should auto update your pipeline 15 minutes before. You can downscale everything. Like that's the true intelligent data map. Like those are the kinds of use cases we should be able to solve with the metadata plane in some ways. And those are all like, I think of them as like, as we think about this control plane layer as just use like more and more, like, can you create activation systems for different use cases of metadata? Awesome. With that, ending the poll for what the audience thinks. In this case, audience is at 60% bundled into other categories and 40% unbundled. So it seems like we have some results there. Actually want to open it up. I can see a very, very sort of active audience. Actually want to open it up for questions and bring on some folks. Sindhu, I saw Sindhu having like a couple of questions. Do you want to come up to actually ask your question if you're still on the call?
Hi,
Sindhu.
I think I posted my question in Q&A already, but you're talking about ideal entity, bundled and unbundled and stuff. So I was thinking, like in the domain that I work in, having version controlling. I mean, I work for a financial services company, so the data transformations. I mean, like services produce raw data like transactions, whatnot, and then they need to be transformed to make sense for reports or whatever. So, but they need like very strict version controlling, auditing and stuff. So I like a lot of these data warehouse or ELT type tools lack that. So I was wondering like what you consider a good experience for having good version controlling for transformations that you write, but also like not force all the analysts to write in like Spark, SQL or Scala or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think DBT is world-class in SQL in terms of versioning your code, and if you follow best practices for DBT, that solves, I think, most of your problems. But as you said, it is only for SQL right now. That is actually the problem the company that I'm the co-founder of Features and Labels is solving. We are adding a Python runtime for DBT. So I agree. I think the DBT like programming style should expand to other languages, and we are still not there yet. But once that happens, I think that would be the best developer experience, and then you'll have all the version control. I'm not sure about auditing. It can be another tool, bundled or unbundled. I'm not sure about auditing yet, but at least the version control, I think the model DBT introduced seems like it's really useful and it's working for people, and we are trying to add more capabilities to it.
I think in terms of the data like versioning, I think Max wrote about like functional data engineering, a modern paradigm. I think it's a very, very good reference architecture to kind of follow. How can we bring those, repeatability and with Airflow, any orchestration engines as a, any orchestration engine as a code that you can actually do that versioning. The other system to look into that, which is I'm kind of exploring, I don't know how much opinion on that. It's like all the data versioning systems like LakeFS and things like that. So LakeFS is kind of focusing on versioning the data, whereas the Airflow concept, like if you adopt a functional data paradigm, your data and code is kind of versioned together closely in cases like this, right? So I think this is the two interesting factors. I think I will say like more and more best practices coming out of mixed up both a version management system and more functional principles. I can share the article in the chat.
Awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that the code versioning and thinking about functional data engineering is like where you start with, and that I feel the versioning the data is kind of an optimization once you have things structured in that way. I think versioning data systems without having this sort of functional programming model where you think of every single data artifact as immutable is a bit of a lost cause.
Awesome. I see we have a question. Daryl, I see you have a question.
Hello. Thank you so much. It's more of a comment, maybe a question, and I'd like to hear you guys comment on it, if you will. Talking about this unbundling versus bundling, observability, data quality, lineage, et cetera. I think the problem or the challenge is really establishing what the standards, if you will, the API or the data contract of what needs to be captured regarding, for example, data lineage, or what needs to be captured with respect to pipeline execution, and having this be an adopted kind of open standards across vendors. I think that until there is alignment across vendors on what things are captured and what kind of telemetry is available, this kind of fragmentation and argument will persist. I think we need to decouple the user experience and the tooling at a higher level from baking in the capturing of this data as foundational to any product that implements, whether it's data quality enforcement or projection in the form of constraints, whether it's executing a data pipeline. And I think that's really where the biggest problem exists, which causes these arguments and this kind of fragmentation. I'm wondering what your panel thinks.
I think standards are a super interesting question and point, because I think the struggle now with lineage, observability, all the different things you mentioned, is that we as the industry don't even know what's good yet. You know, that we still need to be iterating and figuring out exactly what the workflows are going to be, exactly what we want to express. And so I think it's like really hard to build standards ahead of time, ahead of user value. So
See, I don't agree with that, because I believe that there is enough of a body of work out there in terms of the end user community. And when I say end user, I mean the community that purchases products and services from vendors. Okay, that if you polled a large enough group about what do you expose, what information is available in terms of using broad observability, there's enough information out there to start a kind of nascent discussion amongst vendors around an open standard on capturing this information. I think to take your position of we still don't know kind of pushes the problem down the lane. I think the vendors are the only ones that can really spearhead this argument by using focus groups, user groups, using their experience with all of their clients, and then coming together for the collective good of the community, saying, until we as an industry publish, this is what we're all going to collect, at least as a baseline, and then have extensibility, you know, on top of that, of additional artifacts to be captured. We're just, you know, continuing to churn on this. I mean, I know part of the problems with standards is getting alignment and getting adoption, but I think that a vendor that's really going to be taking charge in this regard can really have a lot of impact and really transcend the pursuit of profits and really look at elevating the state of the craft. I think that's the one area that I think if I were going to go into building out new capabilities, it would be, how can I make these products available for vendors themselves? Maybe building out a set of APIs that vendors can publish to do these kind of things.
I think that's a very good point. I think that's a great call for all the vendors out here. I think But I think I'd see the two way, right? There's already the centerpiece of this whole thing is the lineage, end-to-end lineage. There is an effort to do the like open lineage to that, and I don't like there is not much adoption into that. There is also a standard for data discovery, like open data discovery standard or something like that. So we already seen two standards. I would expect like more and more standard. This is what happened in adopting open tracing and open telemetry is kind of same thing, like not many very well adopted industry. I think the way I look at it is like, in a very growth oriented market, whoever control the workflow eat the largest pie. So which means that they will want it to hold it as much as possible. So due to the market dynamics and open standard, I see it's a very, very big of a power play in my opinion. So it would be interesting to see how it goes.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Ananth, I actually somewhat disagree with that in terms of the last point you made, in terms of what, as one of the kind of workflow / orchestration vendors, the way that we want to think about it is that, we describe our system as like this base layer of lineage of observability and whatnot. We want to make it so that if someone adopts Dagster, they can also adopt these other tools in a far more accelerated fashion so that a Datakin or a Great Expectations or whomever doesn't have to start from zero. They start from this base level and they can focus on where they do value add tools. Cause like we can't build everything, So, that's why we've kind of tried to decide on the way we express this is like very generic. Like there's an asset key and an immutable stream of events. And then we want to enable other vendors to consume those events and they can jam their own specific metadata into that stream of events and then extract it out of there. So yeah, I think that, but yeah, I still contend that like the ecosystem doesn't know exactly the way that all these different capabilities are going to be used. And there's not like a bunch of focus groups that we can like figure out the right answer. There's just so much experimentation left.
But you can create it, right? I mean, Prakalpa, you seem to be leading a lot of the charge in this space around, getting communities together to drive out product think and product evolution. And it seems to me that there's a real opportunity here. Now, I'm not saying that I'm in any kind of position to capture it, but I'd really like to see thought leaders in the space really drive this forward, because I think that it is a problem waiting for a solution, and that, again, I'll dispute that there's not enough information out there. Maybe there's not a cohesive community yet that you can poll, but we've got to start somewhere. If we wait for the community to kind of self-reveal and come to the vendors, nothing's going to happen. This is, I think, a place where the tooling vendors, the thought leaders in the space have to kind of take a position. And I like what, I'm sorry, was that Nick? What you were just saying about your extensibility model of providing base functionality and then letting people plug in accordingly. I see the same concept working well around minimal capabilities of observability API or data contracts and lineage data contracts, and start there.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I know we're over time, so I'm gonna actually have to probably close soon. But I think and I agree with what Nick said. Like we, for example, actually see ourselves like this is actually a competitive advantage for us. Like we have this manifesto slide and we say open by default. And I think the industry is moving towards like customers don't want to be logged in anymore, right? Customers want like, and I think especially in the control plane layer, though, I think we're still at the plumbing layer. We're still solving for plumbing. Like maybe the first solution is likely to be closer to what a segment did to help customers drive value in the first place. But I think there is an increasing number of organizations there, including us and what Nick is doing with Dagster, that are saying, hey, like, but we're going to do this in an open, interoperable way. And so hopefully in the next 2 or 3 years, we will get to a place where this is not something that we solve for. But with that, I'm actually going to have to close. I want to ask one last question to the panelists before we close. if there's like, if I could give you a megaphone right now and you could blast a message to the entire data stack, data community, what is the one thing you would want to tell them and leave them with?
Ooh, this is a hard one. Who wants to go first? Who wants to go first? I don't want to go first.
Well, I'll use the opportunity. You should come and check out Dagster, obviously, is the correct answer to that question.
Okay, like a true entrepreneur.
I think I would say one thing. Take a look at the modern data stacks, all the tools in the origin, and what is the actual problem it is solving. This is one thing that I was kind of tweeted like last week, right? Like most of this open source tool came out of a very hyper growth companies, and the hyper growth companies wanted to move the system fast, and there is a set of an organizational structure tuned towards increasing the velocity and value of certain function. And then we create this and open source it as a tool or anything. So what essentially happening is like whatever the organizational structure, what are the complexity kind of leaking outside and coming to you. So my suggestion would be like take a step back, understand what is your organizational structure look like and what is your problem look like, and thinking from a different perspective and say like, okay, if I adopt this tool, what it means to have data workflow in my ecosystem, and adopt that tools rather than adopting kind of, I see most, some of the companies like some interaction for me is like, oh, we want this data discovery system. This has to be mandatory, but how many tables you have? We have only 20 tables, but you can simply hold it, right? So don't think like a checklist that you need to have a data discovery, data lineage, and other things. I think see through your data problem and understand what actually value proposition it is coming in. End of the day, data engineering is in the process of service industry. Like you are servicing someone, you are influencing someone to make a decision. So how efficiently you can serve to your stakeholder, I think that's a critical part of it. Tools come secondary. I think the secondary thing, like if you're starting something new, focus on data lineage foundation right away. And that's something that I always tell you. If I had to build a data warehouse or data ecosystem first, I would definitely start with a strong data lineage association with that, because having a lineage and the catalog of an asset is absolutely critical for you to operating your data ecosystem.
Yeah, my message is to the data community. I think it's one of the friendliest and the most welcoming communities out there. I think the DBT channel, Slack channel, and the local optimistic Slack channel contributes to that. So I would say keep that up. Stay friendly, stay welcoming. I think be kind to other people, and you are doing a great job, and keep doing that. I think that is very valuable. And yeah, let's leave it with that high note.
A big +1, very nice note.
Oh, I agree with that too. I actually had a real answer. I was just messing around with my blatant shilling for Dagster. My message to data community, this is mostly to the vendors, is that always think about where your tool sits in a engineering process. So that means being able to spin up your tool using infrastructure as code. That means be able to program against it so it's flexible and interoperable. Because I think that property is a good outcome for users and also facilitates kind of a win-win dynamic in the ecosystem, which also lends to the positivity in the community, actually. There's so much like growth and green space in front of us that's actually in everyone's best interest to cooperate. But also those Slacks that he mentioned are full of genuinely nice people. So it's both, but the, that is my message.
That's awesome. All right, with that high note and a message to the leaders, the community, and the vendors, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I think it's awesome that I think over 60%, like we're 15 minutes over and over 60% of the audience is still here, which is awesome. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for the panelists for making time and joining us for this great data debate. This has been so much fun, and looking forward to meeting you all in person next week.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.